Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the third event of Beef Productivity from Grassland, where tonight we're going to focus on improving soil health and the use of multi-species swards. This is all being funded by EIT Food. So very quickly about focus on farmers. It's very much we're focusing around technology improvement amongst our farmers. So we're giving these roadshows events every fortnight to upskill, educate a lot of the ABP suppliers. And we're working with a range of other academics, Queen's University, Reading University, Universities of Turin, John Deere, ourselves, and AIA, and it's been supported by AgResearch and Jason's team. We've got two excellent farmer champions, James Evans, everybody knows, based in Shropshire, and Sam Chesney in Northern Ireland, and they will be leading our workshops throughout the next few weeks. Tonight, the format for this evening will be a quick presentation from James on the importance of healthy soils. We then have two guest speakers, Professor Martin Lukic from Reading University. We will then have a question and answer discussion group, which I will lead. Then we'll lead into Sam Chesney on the role of multi-species swards, and then David Humphreys from Reading Diverse Forages Project, followed by questions, and then a take-home messages and leading up to the next events from Nigel Scotland later on in the evening. James, over to you.
But yeah, so really what I was going to speak today really was just my take on how I perceive soil health. And obviously I've gone organic in the last 3 years, and it's kind of changed the way we farm and the way I think about everything really. So before we were organic, we would just do the conventional thing of getting our soils tested, looking at that, get the results back, speak to the fertilizer rep, and he would tell us what we needed to put on. And sometimes I agree, sometimes I didn't, depending on the price. But it just felt, looking back, that we were just constantly trying to address a problem that we could almost never solve by trying to improve the indices of our soil that was just constantly, getting less and less. But obviously, since going to organic production, we've realised that soil biology that really want to alter and try to improve. So we've been doing that by grazing. Actually, we've pretty much stopped doing soil analysis. There's obviously organically, there's not too much you can do, but just by grazing properly, high density of stock on a short area. But what we're looking for now is more of the biology in the soil, the organic matter, and we're finding as well that if we increase the organic matter within our soil, we can actually, the shoulders of our grazing season, fields are actually improving. They're becoming a lot drier. To me, that's the answer to everything. We're getting more production because we've got to cut out on the longer. But also, okay, yeah. So what I was saying, so this field's obviously just these two pictures just showing some soil sampling, and that field on the right hand side is just showing that's taken out in late November. It was a dry autumn, but we found even on wet times, the fields that we've continuously improved the organic matter on, we're able to keep the cattle out a lot longer, and it hasn't happened by chance. So we're improving that all the time, and I just think that going organic and realizing that I become probably skeptical of everybody selling something. Funny enough, usually the people that were very good and tested my soils for free were also the very same people that sold me the fertilizer. And I think we just need to question all this stuff. Do we need it? Does it make us more money? And I think, I was culpable of this as well, that if you have a problem and you see a soil analysis and it's the automatic sort of response of us all as farmers to be good farmers to try and fix it. It's not sure. But whether that actually makes us money or not is two different things, really. So I was just saying that I have become a little bit skeptical. I'm not totally oblivious, and there's lots of soil things, lots of things, fertilizers are great, can improve soil, but I just think now I take everything with a pinch of salt, and I apologize to any salesmen listening out there, but I just think that perhaps in the past they work on the fact that as farmers we just try and do the best possible job all the time and try and replicate things and try and fix things, when I think if the biology of the soil isn't working properly, if you haven't got enough worms, things in the soil. You want to hiding to nothing from the start, really. So, just by grazing it, by increasing the microalgae in the soil, we're improving the water holding capacity. And obviously, there's the great story of organic matter and carbon as well. So I've really sort of brought it back down to earth, pardon the pun, but I think, in future that we may start putting stuff back in the soil, but it's almost pointless until we can get the biology working in our soil again. This is just a few slides, or this is a quick video, I think, by the looks, sort of using this tall grass grazing, this holistic grazing. This field was a real problem. There was no worms in it. The soil structure was completely shot. So we tried this, tall grass grazing, holistic grazing, mob grazing, whatever you call it. So we had 80 cows and calves there on an acre paddock, moving them every day, and they would sort of eat a third and trample a third and leave a third, sort of thing. And, in time, we've definitely seen a massive improvement in the soil quality. Also, what that's doing as well is allowing a lot of those plants, that herbal ley, to go to seed as well. And, that's almost reseeding for free and filling in the bare patches. Yeah, it's a great grazing tool. And I would see that type of grazing more as a soil health improver, as opposed to putting weight on cattle. But for suckler cows and calves, great, you can do that everywhere, but you wouldn't necessarily be wanting to fatten cattle on that type of grass because it's gone quite long and stalky. The roots have gone down really deep, and we're seeing some of these chicory roots going down, almost a foot, 18 inches now. It's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, just basically, I'm using sort of grazing as a tool to improve my soil, and hopefully that will improve the fertility of our farm.
We would like now to hand over to Professor Martin Lukic from Reading University, who's going to lead on soil health, the science.
Okay, good evening. Excellent. So I'll start on my first slide. First, a disclaimer. Normally, I would wave my arms around and show you things in vivo, but I can't do that on the computer, so I will try to be as descriptive as I possibly can. Today, the thing I'm trying to achieve is perhaps not to be too detailed. What I'm trying to do is to show you things you have already seen. I would be very surprised if some of the stuff I'll be showing you have not heard about before. What I'm trying to do is to perhaps turn your understanding a little to see the same thing maybe from a different angle. I need to thank James for setting this up very neatly. One of the things he said was that he would like to get the biology of the soil working. And this is an example of where the biology comes from. This is a forest soil, and most of the soils you use as farmers, they come from forests. 98% of UK agricultural soils have originated under a forest. So what tends to happen in a forest soil is that we have a supply of energy, which on my slide is on the right here. This comes from the trees, from the primary producers. The energy in the organic matter goes into the soil and fuels the biology, fuels the soil engine. And then with every breakdown of organic matter and release of energy, we get a release of CO2. So we have a carbon flux through the soil, which the biological engine leads to the soil function. So this is where we have started. Okay, so we have the trees, which supply the energy, and we have a vast network of fungi in the soil. Now, we move forward 5,000–6,000 years, and we come to a pasture, which is something you all recognize. The basic setting is the same, but what we have done is we have exchanged the trees for the grassland, for some sort of pasture, because obviously your cows do not have wings and they cannot graze on the canopy of the trees. So the trees get in the way, we get rid of them, and now we supply the energy to the grass. So the basic structure of the equation is the same. We have a flux of energy in the form of organic matter through the soil, and we turn it into CO2, which comes out. The soil function in here, it's a little different, because what we have added to the system is some sort of useful purpose. This is the productivity, this is the fertility of the soil, which we are interested in, and which you as farmers use day in, day out. So whereas in the previous picture, there was no point of asking about soil health, because the soil just is under the forest. We don't use it for anything else, it just is. In the second scenario here, all of a sudden, the question of health and the productivity comes up. you will see that I have never defined what soil health is. And the reason for that is that there are many different definitions. I have picked perhaps one of the most common ones, which you can see at the top there, which we can define soil health as the capacity of the soil to function as we know it and to produce. So soil health then is defined as a useful function, useful in terms of humans, in terms of agricultural productivity. In your neck of woods, this would be the ability of the soil to sustain cattle grazing indefinitely in some sort of sustainable manner. So if we are talking about healthy soil under pasture, the assumption is that I can use that soil to produce cattle indefinitely without eroding my resource. So what you can see on the slide also are all sorts of processes that happen in the soil or on the soil: erosion, water infiltration, water retention, nutrient retention, soil biodiversity. You, as the custodians of a piece of land or some soil, you use all these processes in order to maintain and support your production. These are all processes. In the middle, in red, I have put soil structure. This is, I guess you all understand what soil structure is. And what we commonly understand under this term is a soil property. But what I'm trying to do here is for you to start thinking about your soil structure as a process that happens in the soil, because over time it changes and you can change it. The way you manage your field, your pasture, you can change soil structure. So it is a process which is in the middle. I have put it there in red because you can tie all the others to soil structure fairly easily, and it is a process which supports your function, the soil function and soil health. What I have picked here is some sort of indicators of soil health. This is very imperfect, and the reason for that is that, as I have said, the definition of soil health is very fuzzy. It's many different things to many different people. So if we define it in the most broadest sense, as in soil health is the capacity of the soil to produce indefinitely, what I have done is I have picked some indicators. This is what James perhaps was talking about when he was mentioning the testing, and people try and test my soil to give me an indication of how does it work, what does it do. So what I have done, I have listed some common indicators or perhaps common tests. You can see the science behind it, hopefully, of how you can start describing your soil health. Starting perhaps with the easiest one to measure and to understand at the top, which is the soil carbon content, all the way down to the prevalence of pests and diseases in the soil. If you define soil health as the soil's capacity to function and to provide, you can then start putting your puzzle together if you try and follow up on all of these or some of these indicators. One of the points I'm trying to make or I'm trying to push is that we have started with a forest soil. We have changed the size of the engine by changing the type of the vegetation. We have changed the type of the engine because we have more or less got rid of all sorts of mycorrhiza and many different species of fungi from the soil, which originally were there when the soil developed. And now we are trying to run it in order to produce some agricultural production from it also. One of the things we should do in order to improve the sustainability of our use of the soil, the first one here, what we can do is to improve plant diversity. And again, this is something James mentioned. He was talking about deep-rooting plants, which improve the structure of the soil. So this is just an illustration, just for the purpose of illustrating the principle. It's a drawing from Cotswold Seeds. I cannot comment on their capacity or on their ability to produce and supply seed, but as purveyors of illustrations, they are very good. This is perhaps the best illustration of this type that I know of. So what you can see here is that if you improve or if you increase the diversity of plants, you are very likely to increase the diversity and the depth distribution of the exploration of the soil. So you are increasing the size of your resource. Remember that soil is always a three-dimensional resource for all the plants that live in. So increasing diversity tends to improve the function and the ability of the soil to produce, which is something we commonly know as fertility. The other thing I wanted to mention here is sometimes it's useful if you take some of these images and you turn them upside down. Because what we are used to is to view it like this. This is our understanding of the world. We have the above ground part of the plants on the top, and then we have the root systems and the soil at the bottom. But if you turn it upside down, what you can see, you are essentially, on this image, you are with the deepest rooting plants, you are exploring 3 meters of the soil. So if you were to imagine it upside down, you would have a 3 meter tall thicket of vegetation on top of the soil, which is something you want to achieve. This is one of the ways of how to improve and how to make our use of the soils more sustainable. And the other one, this is coming as close as possible to the original setup with trees and forests in it. Now, as I said, you cannot go back to the forest because you lose the agricultural function, which is the key function of agriculture. So we do not want to do that, but perhaps we want to put some trees in it, which is coming very close to the original setup, with the trees supplying at least some of the organic matter into the soil, powering the engine, so to say, and a large network of fungi in the soil, being mycorrhizal or saprophytic or all sorts of different types, which have evolved to exploit trees as the host organism. So this is something, this kind of system is something where we can come the closest to the original setup, and in a way the closest to the healthier soil. So just to summarize my brief talk, the message I'm trying to convey, I think is a positive one. I think it's a message of hope, in that despite the fact that we have changed original natural systems to fit our purpose, we now have the understanding and the technology to improve the sustainability of cattle production and to make our soils healthier.
So we've got time for some questions. So the first one is from Louise, and it is, can you improve the health of soil by grazing sheep?
Yeah, no, I think you can. It's difficult. In fact, I listened to something about this the other night, and there are people doing sort of tall grass grazing with sheep. I think it's more difficult. I think it can be done, and what some people are trying to do is do a leader-follower system. So they're putting the sheep in first, they're picking the best, and let the cattle do it afterwards. But yeah, I mean, people are doing it, but I think it's just more effective with cattle.
Disclaimer again, I am not a farmer, so I can just perhaps point out a systemic feature, and that would be that if you use your sheep in a way that supports or enhances plant diversity, you are very likely to end up with a healthier soil in the long run.
Another question coming in, this is for you, James, from Wilbert. What is your stocking rate per hectare, please?
I often get asked that, and it varies from super high density to very extreme. Perhaps I should have explained a little bit about our farm is that we've got a complete mixture of land types. So we've got some moorland. There's a 400-acre hill that's only allowed 40 cows on it, and then other areas that we're putting probably, I think it was 100,000 kilos per acre on at times. So it can vary massively.
Is a grass harrow useful?
Again, the same kind of answer as I've already said, I suspect, is the one that fits here. If you use it in a way that does not harm or impinge on the plant diversity you have in your pasture, then it is useful. Okay, there will be brilliant specific situations with some soil types where it's more useful than elsewhere, but by and large, I think so.
Another one question, how often should you introduce irrigation into your soil structure?
That depends on the crop, I suspect. If we are talking about pasture, again, not all fields are the same. Just thinking about our university farms, there are bits where the irrigation would or should be supplied starting from maybe June onwards. There are places on our farms where the irrigation should never be applied. I'm just trying to think if there is a slightly different point behind the question. By improving soil structure, you are very likely to reduce the need for irrigation, because you are going to reduce the runoff from the field, surface runoff of water from the field.
Two more questions, if we can get through them. How much grass production would you expect to lose in a typical agroforestry setup?
There are two bits in here. Point number one is that the loss of grass productivity depends on the stocking density of the trees. The more trees you put in, the more shade they will cast on your pasture, and the less productive the grass would be. So in a typical agroforestry setup, you are talking about, let's say, 10% area covered by the trees. So by and large, you are looking at up to 10% loss. But the second point in here is that you can use the production of the trees to feed your cattle or your sheep. One of the ways to do it is to pull out the trees regularly, so that when they have a maximum canopy, you cut some of the branches, and the animals will be very happy to eat that. I have a couple of colleagues who specialize in animal science. They are running some experiments to see how does this improve animal nutrition, because the nutrient content of the leaves and the fine branches on the trees is very different from your typical pasture.
How often should you aerate in your soil structure?
It's very difficult to give you a definite answer that would fit everywhere, because it doesn't. Even within the same field, you have bits where you should or could aerate it more often, and there will be bits in the same field where it doesn't need to be aerated at all. I suspect, in talking about soil health and trying to look at it from a sustainability point of view, you can use vegetation to do the aeration for you. There's an element of trust in here, in that you give up some sort of you give up a bit of control which you have with your mechanized interventions, and you trust the same job to the vegetation, which you do not know exactly how it's going to pan out. This is something that James touched upon also.
James, how many species are in your herbal ley?
I think there's about 12.
Over to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Good evening, everybody. I'm glad to see so many folk listening tonight, probably because it's very wet and dismal here in Northern Ireland. We had 7.5 mils today, and we had 21 mils on Wednesday. So it sets the scene nicely. Why did I go down the herbal ley route? We're producing about 1,600 kilos of live weight per hectare here. Our grazing 3,500 to 7,000 kilos per hectare on our grazing platform. And I wanted a more sustainable way of producing a very nice sward that will perform well. So we headed down the herbal ley route, which contains of red clover, white clover, chicory, plantain, and some tetraploid ryegrass. So we have grazed this for the second year now. We put it into paddocks, and we continually grazed the paddocks up and down the field with a batch. It so happened they were blade, dairy bred Angus cows, but it could have been anything. We grazed them up and down that field the whole year and did exceptionally well. To date, they produced 8.6 tons per hectare. Although the weather's turned very, very bad here now, and we're having to rest it at present. But what we talked about earlier on about water filtration and soil condition, we have been trying to condition our soil now for the past 10 years. To that fact, we only sprayed farmyard manure on our grazing platform. We had people here the other day, and we were able to dig a spade anywhere in the field and come up with a spade full of worms. And to me, that's very, very important. We've talked earlier on in this evening about soil and soil compaction and soil quality. But if you haven't got the soil right, it doesn't really matter what you grow in it, because it'll not grow right. The herbs that we're growing are suitable for a heavier type ley, heavier type ground. We'll be a heavier type soil type here. The ones that would grow better in lighter soils, I don't think would probably grow as well here. But we're very excited with the way they've performed. We haven't dosed or drenched any of the cattle that were grazing their herbal ley with an anthelmintic at all since they were turned out at the end of February. They're housed now because of the weather, because they're on a 90-day finishing period in the house, and that'll be them out of the system. The herbal ley will grow on, and we'll graze it over the winter with the sheep. We have red start in another field, which will come out in the springtime, and it'll go into herbal ley again. So we are continuing to add a wee bit more to our grazing platform to be a wee bit more diverse, being a wee bit cynical here that probably part of our future agriculture support will be on something like a herbal ley or a protein crop or something like that. So maybe we're back into horses. But as James has found out, it's definitely a nice way to graze cattle. If you just look at the picture behind those things, you can see the lovely clovers. So the chicory is very deep rooting, the plantain's very deep rooting, but they're also very, very high in protein and very palatable. The white clover and red clover, they'll fix as much nitrogen as you need. So to that fact, we didn't have to spread any fertilizer apart from a wee bit of P phosphate because the field was low in phosphate. I am a soil tester. I would test soil quite often because I think we need to know what we have to start off with. The pH to me is the most important thing, and lime. And a question I like to ask for some of the experts on there too is granulated lime better than the powdered lime or vice versa? Because we use the powdered lime. But if your pH isn't right, for example, if your pH is 7, you're using 100% of your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potash. If it's 6, you're only using 90% of your nitrogen, 50% of your phosphorus, and you're still using 100% of your potash. So it's very, very cheap money to soil sample. Sorry, James, but it's very cheap money to soil sample and a very good return on your investment. And really, we're all talking about growing all this stuff. It's not for a hobby we're doing it. It's to make a good return on our produce. It's a nice way for people to see your beef grazing this lovely herbal green sward with clover in it and red clovers in it, the plantains and chicory. It's lovely for people to see that. So again, it's a plus for the beef industry and the sheep industry that we can produce swards like that. It's very sustainable.
David Humphreys from Reading University, who's going to talk about the Diverse Forages project.
Quick overview and some initial results from a project we're running here at Reading that are relevant to this discussion. It's a project we're calling the Diverse Forages project. It's a 5-year project. It's a collaboration between us at Reading, Duchy College in Cornwall, Rothamsted Northwyke in Devon, and Cotswold Seeds. We're now in the final year of the project, final year of the 5 years, and we're starting to focus on data. Up to now, we've been capturing data. It's hopefully gives us an independent evaluation of diverse forages and where they fit into the system. So some advantages of the swards is a requirement for less nitrogen fertilizer, as a knock-on, less risk of releasing pollutants to the environment. As we've mentioned previously, enhanced soil structure and fertility, resilience to extreme weather, certainly in dry weather from some of the deeper rooted forages we have. Animal health benefits from some of the species we can incorporate, such as sandfoin or chicory. We're struggling on the negatives, we're struggling a bit to get a detailed nutritional analysis. There are no calibrations, certainly for NRS, for mixed forages. It's a very variable product throughout the year. We get different species at different times and different years. The success we've found can vary a lot with the soil type and the starting point. We can see a loss of species richness over time, and they can be less straightforward to manage, so much more diversity in the forages. So the forage is quite complex. It involves 10 demonstration farmers who are growing the forage mixes for us under their own systems. Agronomy trial plots on 6 sites across the south of England, from Reading through to Cornwall. Established biodiverse forage on challenging soils, so droughty and waterlogged soils. We're running 2 full years of beef grazing work, and as part of that, we're looking at digestibility and a little bit of work on methane production as well. And we're feeding all this data into a modelling exercise to hopefully make sense and collate the data that we're going to produce from this project. So when we started planning this project, and that was 2015, we were looking at properties of the ideal mixture, diverse mixture we might use. So we were focusing on sustainable livestock production. The mix needed to be productive, require less inorganic nitrogen fertilizer applications, and contribute to the overall efficiency of nitrogen use at the animal and farm scale, while enhancing soil fertility and structure, as Martin's mentioned in his presentation, and some enhanced resilience to the more extremes of climate we're seeing in certain parts of the country. So deep rooting for drought resistance, and the spread of species, so different species thrive at different times of the year in dry or wet conditions to spread the risk, if you like. So these are the mixtures we've agreed on for the trial. The herbal mix is 17 species, and this is a Cotswold Seed standard herbal. Two less complex species. One we call biomix with 12 species and smartgrass with 6 species. Both these mixes have been informed by success in previous projects. And we have the fourth control, that's a standard ryegrass mixture. And we're applying 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year to the control. And we made a conscious decision not to apply any fertilizer at all to the herbal biomix or smartgrass treatments. These treatments we established in 2016. So we've got 4 years of data from this regime. It's an animation. We're sampling the agronomy plots 3 times a year. This is 6 sites spread across the south of England. And this is just attempting to briefly show how the species within the layers change over time. So the differences in the control are weeds coming in and out, more weeds at establishment, certainly, and the other species in the other mixes just changing through the season, through time and through location. So it's been very difficult to pin down the ideal species for the ideal site. We get a huge variety from site to site, despite attempting to establish in the same way with identical seed mixes. So this is some initial results. This is from the agronomy plot. So this is 6 sites cut between 4 and 6 times a year over 3 years. Year 1 was 2017. So ryegrass did best in the establishment year, just over 12 tons of dry matter. But the mixed forages did okay. The second year, this was 2018. This was the very dry and droughty year. And the forages all yielded about 8 tons of matter per hectare, similar. Last year, 2019, that was also very droughty and challenging in this part of the world. And in year 3, we were seeing the diverse layers out yield the ryegrass monoculture. This is 3 years in with no fertilizer, and the ryegrass has received 250 kilos of N per year. So very encouraging. This is just an example of the seasonality spread we see on the sites. This is one site. We'll collate all the data eventually into the 6 sites. So this is ryegrass yielding heavily in the first part of the season, and as the season dries out, then the mixed foragers come into their own and start contributing. So it's a contributory effect. If we have a mix of ryegrass, swards and herbals, they can complement each other throughout the growing season quite well. The steer grazing study, this is some pictures from our study. We were using dairy bred calves, pure Holsteins or Holstein Angus crosses from our dairy herd here. And we've established 20 hectares of diverse forages to support this study. We've been doing daily pasture measurements and daily fence movements to control intake and scientifically meter out the forages to the animal based on requirements for growth. We've been measuring live weight weekly and taking forage samples for quality throughout the study. And you can see we've had a huge range of different approaches within the study, from a neat and tidy strip grazing to tall grass grazing, as the previous presentation showed. So some results from this study this is over 2 full grazing seasons. The first season of measurement, we achieved just over 1 kilo of growth just from the pastures. We didn't see a difference there between the pasture types. The diverse forages matched the ryegrass for growth rates in our study. Growth rates were a little less in the second year in 2018, but we started with slightly heavier animals. But again, the growth rates we achieved from the Holstein steers, unfertilized diverse forages, matched the growth rates from the fertilized perennial ryegrass swards. While we were doing this trial, we also looked at intakes from the animals and the digestibility of the swards, so the D value. And again, the performance of the herbal layers closely matched the performance of the conventionally managed and fertilized perennial ryegrass. And digestibility was extremely similar indicating a similar quality of nutrition, so similar growth rates, similar intakes and similar levels of digestibility among the animals, suggesting at least an equivalence in terms of production potential from diverse forages. So some challenges we've seen is the variety and the variation of the swards over time, over site, seasonal, and some problems with excessive sward maturity. Persistency can come and go with the different species. And this year we've seen, for example, a lot of trefoil, which we haven't seen in the previous 3 years, and a lot of yarrow, which we haven't seen in the previous years. So even though you haven't got it one year, the conditions can favour one of the species that hasn't been persistent in previous years. So it's an extremely dynamic pasture that changes almost every time you go out and look at it. And we've found, even on our small area, very strong location effects. If we're shifting from free draining gravelly soil to a very loamy soil, we can get a grass rich or a herbal rich establishment. Establishment's been a challenge, getting the slower growing diverse forages off to a good start, and weed control is a challenge if you've got a slow germination. Measurement of biomass is difficult using the conventional rising plate meter method. When the pasture is taller than the plate meter handle, it's obviously not going to work. And we've been measuring this right through the project, so there's a lot of data I'm not presenting here that over the next 6 months, 12 months will come out and inform better on the performance of diverse forages. There are no good guidelines for grazing management. There's lots of different approaches. How persistent are the diverse forages under different grazing regimes? Intensive, strip, tall grass grazing, sheep, cattle. And there's limited variety choice for some of the species on the market at the moment. So there's only 1 or 2 varieties there. Some indications from the project so far, they seem to be a logical progression from grass and clover swards. They add much more dynamics and variety to the sward. We've shown that the use of legumes within the sward reduces, even eliminates the requirement for nitrogen fertilizer in this particular project. And at certain times of year, we have yield benefits over ryegrass monocultures from the diverse forages because of their drought tolerance in the later drier part of the year. Hopefully, working with Martin, we soil sampled at the start and the end of the project, so we'll be able to show soil structure advantages and fertility of soil. We have a lot of samples. Again, I can't present it all at the moment. And we're hoping to look a little bit more about the anthelmintic properties from the tannins and also maybe the canopy architecture. And we've also strong indicators of reduced methane emissions from diverse forages in the work we've done so far. They can have strong environmental benefits, but the guidelines to maximise the yield of diverse forages and the nutritional quality, timing of management and grazing and cutting and siling are lacking somewhat at the moment. Hopefully this project will go some way to fill in some of the holes and knowledge in the management of diverse forages. And that's the team involved in the project. Thanks a lot.
A bit of a question and discussions now following those 2 presentations from Sam and Dave. From JCM Farms, can you accurately plate meter a herbal ley to get dry matter output?
We've done it quite accurately within a certain height range. We have, every time we've plate metered, we've also taken a quadrat cut and weighed the forage that was under the plate meter. So we will be hoping to establish equations that are relevant to accurately estimating biomass yield from the rising plate meter. We've found in the early part of the season it works reasonably well, but in the later part of the season, when some of the forage species get stemmy and woody, it just doesn't compress and doesn't give you an accurate output.
Another one coming our way. This is probably for Sam. How do you control your weeds in the ley? Do you use a weed wiper?
We don't have any weeds in the ley whatsoever. It's remarkable when the cattle get used to eating broadleaf plants. We've walked them across. Actually, we walked a batch of 40 heifers across the field, and the first thing they saw were ducks, and they ate them. So we don't have weeds that are eating out of the sward. We probably graze it too tight, but that's what we do, and it works very well.
There's two questions I'm going to amalgamate together. So one is, can you make quality silage from a herbal ley? And how long can you leave that herbal ley down for?
Well, we have made silage. We've made quite a dry silage at the moment because it was a very small part, a small area of the farm, so it didn't fit with our commercial precision chopping on the grass. So we made some wrapped bale silage. Apart from getting the wilt on the very thick chicory stems, which can be a problem, and obviously the stems poking out of the wrap, the silage was fine. And we've done another sub trial I haven't mentioned on diverse forage silage, so that's some more data we'll produce, but I didn't present that. So we have made reasonable silage from diverse forages.
Can I just jump in there? We made silage, different sort of climate, probably, Dave, from you over here in Northern Ireland, and it was very wet, very hard to make. It would need to have been wilted for 2 or 3 days because there was just so much water in the plantain and the chicory leaves. So we had trouble making. It was good enough when we had it in the silo, good enough to feed out, quite palatable, but it was difficult to make, too much effluent coming out of the leaves. That was our
experience.
Yeah.
Another question for you, Sam. Have you blood tested your animals to see if the herbal leys have improved trace elements for animal health?
We haven't done that as of yet. We intend to do that. Actually, this is a contentious point. Jason and I have been talking about this, doing a project about the blood sample and the profile of the herbal ley cattle versus the perennial ryegrass cattle, and that would be intended to do. Likewise, I see one of the questions about worm burdens, fecal egg packs. We haven't done a fecal sample of them yet. That, of course, will be done.
Okay, super. So it'd be really interesting to hear what comes from that, actually, Sam, for the group. Another one for you, Sam. And this is from Alan. Sam, just wondering how those cattle on the herbal ley have performed in daily live weight gain and in live weight gain per hectare in comparison with cattle on standard leys.
They have performed to a similar standard. However, the ones that were on the herbal leys may not have been of the same genetic merit to the ones that were grazing a perennial ryegrass. The ones that were grazing the perennial swards were out of high genetic merit bulls of a similar production standard, I would have said. The live weight gain was negligibly different.
We found that as well, a similar growth rate on herbals compared to ryegrass with our rather slow-growing Holstein, pure Holstein steers, about 1 kilo a day from both on just pasture.
Another question, if you had daily paddocks set up on the herbal ley, would you expect to see an increase in growth rates as you would in a standard ley?
I think not, because again, they're very selective. Cattle are very selective. We have a tetraploid grass in along with our herbal leys, and depending on the weather, if it's dry and it's dry and sunny, they'll go in and clean out the tetraploid grass within hours and then go into the herbs. If it's wet, they'll take some of the other stuff first, to take some of the taller chicory or taller grasses, or some of the clovers.
Anything from you, Dave, on that?
Well, we've tightly strip grazed them, so we've given the cattle what they need to grow and maintain with a small excess. So we've made them eat all the species within the ley and then move the fence, but we've been moving the fence daily. And production and the yield of the pasture, again, is the herbals are matching the ryegrass.
Another question coming through from Michael Woodrow. Have you done any in vitro NDF or DM digestibilities for herbal leys so we can compare them against other forages / feeds?
We've done in vivo digestibilities, and the digestibility of the herbals and the ryegrass was about 74 on the work we've done. We've taken samples right through this study. We've not analysed them all yet, but we should have quite a lot of information on the nutrition of herbal leys by the time we put this thing together. But our in vivo, that's feeding pure herbal leys and collecting all the feces coming out of the cattle for a week and weighing the dry matter of feces produced versus the dry matter of herbal ley consumed. It was about 70, a D value of about 74 for ryegrass and the herbals as well.
Sam, you spoke about not dosing young stock grazing herbal A's. Did you do a fecal egg count sample to back up no dosing policy due to lower worm burdens? I know you sort of touched on this already, but
Yeah. No, we haven't done that analysis yet. However, we kept a very close eye on those cattle all summer versus other batches around the farm. They had a tremendous thrive, a tremendous shine, and they showed no detriment to not being dosed. But I didn't do a fecal egg count during the summer. But we have done one at present. There's one in at present, to see if there was any worms at all, if any.
Another one for you, Sam. This is quite a long one from Mike. Thanks very much, Mike, for asking this. How does the herbal lay yield compare to your standard ryegrass with nitrogen fertilizer? What is the relevant costs per kilo grass grown? What was the relevant live weight gain of the animals per hectare? And what did it cost per kilo live weight put on?
The amount of fertilizer that was put on the herbal lay was half the amount of fertilizer that was put on the perennial ryegrass. So assuming they're doing a similar amount of live weight gain, it's costing me half as much to grow that herbal lay as it is a perennial ryegrass sward. If I'm putting on a kilo at 16 pence, it should be costing me 8 pence, or 10 pence for easy counting a kilo. So therefore, yeah, we're much better off. And in terms of fertilizer, anyhow, that's my reckoning on it anyhow, so far.
Any issues with bloat in the cattle, Sam?
None. They went into the field dry. They haven't been hungry. Actually, the first one they went in, the day they went in, we put a jam jar of cooking oil into the water trough, but we've had no problems with bloat whatsoever. And we've grown red clover for 10 years now too, and we've grazed red clover and no problem with bloat either.
One more question. How long can you reasonably expect a herbal lay to last under rotational grazing conditions?
I was 4 years in, and they're getting better, so I would say 6 to 8 years.
I'd like now to we would like to do some take-home messages and next events for the next couple of minutes. And so if I'd like to hand over to Professor Nigel Scollin. Nigel, can I leave that to wrap up, please?
Thank you very much, James, and thank you to all of you for joining us again this evening. And special thank you to all our speakers tonight. I think it's been an excellent session, and I'm going to keep the wrap up very, very brief. I think the key home message from me is highlighting the very significant role that soil drives in delivering productivity and function and a wide variety of functions on our farms. I think it was very elegantly opened up by James, highlighting the importance of soil biology. It's a living ecosystem, and how he's using grazing as a tool to improve his soil fertility and soil biology. And Martin augmented that. It was really excellent to see a range of soil health indicators. This is something that we are frequently asked by farmers. What is soil health? What should we be looking at? And Martin, a really good descriptor of what is soil health and what are the metrics in around that. And Martin also introduced the importance of plant type diversity in improving soil fertility and soil health. That was built on very well by Sam in demonstrating the journey that he has been on in terms of introducing herbal lays into his fields as a way of further promoting improvements in soil structure. And the very elegant project that Dave summarised to us from colleagues at Reading and other partners really highlighted the opportunities that species-rich swards can deliver in improving soil health and fertility, but also that animal productivity can be sustained in comparison to high fertilized grass pastures. Dave also highlighted some of the messages in around species-rich swards, including variation within the farm, field to field, seasonal variation, etc. But overall, some very promising work coming out in around this area of multi-species. And finally, just to mention that on Monday, the 21st of September, we're going to be delighted to welcome Dr. John Gilliland, Director of Global Agriculture at Devonish Nutrition. John's going to be speaking to us about putting theory into practice, accelerating the journey to carbon neutrality. And I hope that topic will very nicely build on what we started really 2 weeks ago in driving productivity from soil and grassland. Soil is critical. Multi-species swards add an interesting dimension, and John will extend that into this journey towards net zero carbon neutrality. So we look forward to welcoming John on 2 weeks' time. 5th of October, we'll be focusing on One Health and farm animal welfare. And our final event on the 19th of October, we'll be looking at the products that we produce from these systems, and particularly in around the subject of eating quality of beef. So we look forward to you joining us at those events. And we'd also like you to help us out with completing feedback on these events. This is all part of a project where, yes, we're seeking to deliver useful messages and have conversations here in these events, but we're also learning about the use of digital technology, and we very much appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much to everybody.